Vision that I see in order to make your project and this kind of transformation successful. So that's mainly we'll be talking about. And finally, there will be a questions and answer. So feel free to ask any questions whenever you want to, and then we can go from there. So that's we are going to cover. So let's just move on to our first item, which is current situation. So here I'm going to talk about a typical scenario when a project starts. So whenever a new project starts, a team decides on a project management tool, right? It could be Jira, it could be Rally, and then they decide that how they are going to use it for managing their user stories, for managing their product backlogs, their releases, their sprints. They also decide what's going to be their development principle. So if they are going with Agile, like what form of Agile? Is it going to be Scrum? Is it going to be a Kanban? Is it going to be a Scrumban? So that decision takes place when we start a project, right? And then the important roles get assigned to the team, right? So in Agile, so there are important roles like Scrum Master. You have, so that's a very intense role, right? Making sure all the Scrum ceremony is happening and make sure the project is on the right track, right? Then you have product owner. So we assign these roles. We also assign the other role, like who's going to play the architect role, like who's going to be the development team. So consider this is kind of a project is starting, right? It's kind of a project kickoff which is going on, right? You decide what's going to be your Scrum ceremonies, when your sprint planning is going to happen. What are the limitations of managing Agile projects? So the main thing which I want to talk about is gap in understanding. So here we see a gap in basically between your senior leadership and the development team. And then let's just talk a little bit more about the Agile challenges needs to be considered, right? So now challenge is like who is going to take care of these factors, right? You know that we have assigned the roles, we have Scrum Master, we have product owner, right? So the Scrum Master, they have to ensure your sprint, your Scrum ceremonies are happening, right? They need to make sure the light documentation that you're maintaining, right? The sprint retrospectives, right? So those are the things that they are looking into, right? So this is something which is beyond Agile. As I said, Scrum Master, product owners, right? So are we expecting too much from our teams, or should we help them with the technology, right? And the main focus during these kind of meetings was the key Agile metrics, right? If you want, make sure you have a product burn down there, you have your burn up chart there, you have the velocity there, and then you can make progress, right? It can just be a SharePoint dashboard. And ideally, what I envision that with this kind of a application should be a robust, scalable, intuitive dashboard that can show the progress of a project and be able to highlight red flags, bottlenecks in the system, and not just this, but also be able to show the status of non-functional requirements. So that's what I see as kind of a digital transformation.
About fixing broken teams, and I think it says something about how to do it without really expanding your budget, because a lot of times that's the first reaction. So let's jump into it a little bit. So I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and I wanted to use this story just to let you know that this is the first time I'm going over this material. And if you do a lot of comedy, if you watch a lot of comedy, sometimes you'll go to a show where the comedian's actually trying material, and he's doing it to see what resonates with people, right? Not necessarily like as a practice, but like, does this work? Does that work? So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. And ultimately, I'm not shooting for this A+ grade. I'm kind of shooting for maybe a B. And hopefully it's better than that, but you never know. So let's define a little bit about what I mean by broken teams, right? I think all of us probably have a different definition. What I mean is erratic delivery and low throughput, right? So they're not doing what we need them to do. A lot of that comes down to quality or just missing deadlines, right? We've all experienced that. That's kind of the reality. If you dig deeper into it, it's usually a bunch of things, but it's like bad definition of roles, people in the wrong position, or lack of accountability. Like, it's just not important enough to make the deadline to make everyone do it. So that's a problem. So let's talk about denial. So a lot of times, if you're talking about an agile team, they talk about their velocity, but they don't finish, right? So what does that mean when you have a velocity of something that's not finished? So a lot of times you go into a situation like this, and this is kind of my specialty. Like, I look for broken teams and places where I can go to fix them. It's kind of a sick habit of mine. But a lot of times people look for these, somewhat easy answers, like let's just add more people, or let's just massively change the methodology, or better yet, let's just stop and start over. None of those are really going to work out with the business very well. The first one, maybe. You might be able to convince a manager to like, okay, let's add a couple people or do whatever. And sometimes that's absolutely necessary, but it shouldn't be your first reaction. So so what do I do? So first, it's about learning to execute. And what that means to me is to deliver upon the agreed upon scope on time, right? It's just that. It's not about quality. It's not about how you deliver it. It's just do it, right? Let's get to a point where we have the confidence to actually deliver what we're supposed to deliver. And that's actually really important, and I think it has to be the first step. It goes back to my velocity thing I said earlier. If you can't actually finish, then you don't really know how fast you're going, and you cannot predict the future, right? You cannot use any of that information to help you figure out how well you're going to do the next time. So the next thing, after you've established this culture of deliveries, you then want to work on a quality focus. So that means let's get rid of the waste, right? This is a lean concept. It shouldn't be new to anyone that's looked at agile or lean. Just remove waste. And bugs, especially escape defects, but even the defects that you find in your development process that are weeded out by QA, those are expensive. And there's lots of studies on how expensive they are, and I'm not here to talk about that so much, but I'm just saying they are expensive and they're easy to get rid of. If you change your culture to a quality culture, instead of being okay with bugs, start being not okay with them, right? And then finally, once you got these two cultural elements in place, you're learning to execute, you got a quality focus, then continuously improve. Now, the cool thing about continuous improvement, I'll talk about this briefly later, is if you're doing those first two things, the team will want to improve. You don't really have to actually instill that as a discipline. It just kind of comes from that. And I've seen this happen 3 or 4 times. So it's, this is something that I have a lot of confidence to talk about because I've done it. So let's back up a second and let's talk about leadership. And again, this is my perspective. I'm not an expert on leadership. If you want to go learn about leadership, you probably should talk to somebody else. But I know a lot about it because I've done it. And I really don't want to talk about what a leader is, but I want to talk about the tools that leaders have, right? So one of the things when I was researching this topic about, should I talk about this topic? Again, is it going to resonate with people? I did some research online, and a lot of people talk about, oh yeah, if you want to fix your broken team, just go talk to them and find out what they need to do different, and then sort of evolutionary through that process, retrospectives, fix it. And I think that can work. That's not going to happen very fast. It's probably not going to meet your business objectives, but it is a tool that you have in your toolkit as a leader. The next tool that you have, and I'm calling it a tool, even though it's maybe a trait, is setting direction and influencing both your team and other teams. Really only works is to reduce the expectations of what you're going to deliver, right? So not to zero like the reset I was talking about, but like let's reset it to 50% or 60% of what we think we can do. Now we're going to execute. We're going to have quality focus. That's going to be important. And what I do is I put it in their goals and measurements, right? So if you're talking about SMART goals and like a classic big company, goal 1, deliver on time, every release this year. Goal 2, less bugs, right? Well, figure out what less bugs means, define that. It should be just less. It shouldn't be a target number because that's bad metrics. But just make it real for them, right? Your bonuses or whatever we're going to measure you on at the end of the year is going to be based on these things that are culturally important to us. You're not going to be able to measure anything. You're not going to be able to predict anything. You're not going to be able to really tell what's going on. And you can't do it in a half manner, right? Like you have to do it in a wholehearted manner. Like every ticket has to be updated exactly the right way. And what I mean by that is, all the fields that matter for your metrics collection have to be updated. And I'll talk about some of those later. And then you have to report on it and actually go back to people and say, hey, here's all the stuff that we're collecting and why we're collecting it and how we're using it in an interesting way to make us better, so that people know that updating these tickets actually makes a difference, right? Because if you're just updating tickets for updating tickets in that way, then people just stop doing it. And then this ticketing system must be the source of truth. Someone probably cooler than me said that, but I'm taking credit for it right now. So we're moving on to quality. So we talked a little bit about execution. Now this is the quality section. You have to measure the defects, and you have to measure them in the right way. And a lot of the execution stuff, actually, if we want to go back to that, is related to not understanding how defects actually break your process. It doesn't do what I'm trying to do any justice, by the way. But I couldn't figure out how to actually tell the story. But really what I'm trying to say is if you're working in a process where there's a lot of production defects, then you're spending a lot of time way up there wasting your time on fixing production defects and not a lot of time on building features. I've been at teams where 50% of what we do is fixing production bugs. 50%, that's too many. That's just way too many. So if you're way up there in the quadrant, then you really have to look at what you're doing and what is our real code quality. There's tons of technical debt. I'm not talking about technical debt here, but you all know underlying, that's what we're talking about here, is usually some startup moved into customer phase. Now there's lots of broken stuff that nobody's tried before. It's a huge problem. A lot of times people are in the wrong roles and you got to move them around. So there was a company I went to where the requirements were terrible because it was basically a non-technical product manager would hand things over to the dev team and they would build it and nothing came out right. Essentially, even though they were building features, nothing ever worked. It didn't meet the needs. And so I took a developer, turned them into a technical analyst, basically. You could call them a product owner in modern times. And that eliminated that problem. And a lot of what we gained here was just from that. Like we got rid of that first category I was telling you about, which is requirements confusion. All of a sudden we were building things that actually worked because we knew what they were. So don't skip retrospectives. That's my advice to you. Do not skip retrospectives. They're very important. So like I said, I'm a little bit of an agilist. So here's some of my theory on agile as related to what we've talked about. I think it's important to have a cadence. I'm a Kanban kind of guy because I like the evolutionary nature of it versus going with a hard, fast, like Scrum approach where you're like going from nothing to Scrum or from some process to Scrum. That's that massive transformation. I don't love that. But I think the cadence is important. So we're going to deliver something every week or every 2 weeks. It looks like this. We can show it to our product management team or customers or whomever we have to. So that's important. Deliver sooner than later, of course. Buy into the schedule. This is really important. Have a strong definition of done. Obviously, that's what I was talking about in step 1. And then do retrospectives. So that's my agile piece of this. And then finally, here's the takeaways, which is really everything I've talked about. Broken teams are not bad people, right? Broken teams are just people that have lost their way or they didn't have a way to start with. And teaming is hard, right? You put a bunch of people together, they got to figure stuff out. If you don't give them direction, it's going to be hard to make that happen. Maybe if you have all senior guys that have all done the exact same way in the past, you might get something pretty fast. Establish the right culture. Everything I've talked about is really about culture, like the delivery culture, the quality culture, the continuous improvement culture. Those are really cultural things. You have to make those relevant in your world. And then finally, agile methods are not required, and I was going to put, but it'd be cooler if you used them, you know, sort of in the Austin spirit. But I decided I didn't want to go with any images that might get me in trouble. So, so that's it.